I sat perfectly still as 12 hands shot into the air. My mother-in-law had just called a formal family vote to permanently ban me from the family. Every single person at that table voted yes. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked around that lavish dining room and thought about something none of them knew. I secretly owned it. And within 7 days, I would legally evict them from their entire lives. Stay with me, because the way I did it is going to shock you. My name is Maya. I'm 34, a corporate crisis manager based in Atlanta. I dismantle hostile takeovers, neutralize PR disasters, and negotiate multi-million-dollar settlements for a living. I am trained to stay ice cold when everything is burning. But nothing in my professional career prepared me for what happened at the Harmon family estate on Thanksgiving Day. It had been 2 years since my husband Daniel passed away in a car accident. This was the first major holiday I'd agreed to spend with his family since his funeral. I came for one reason, to keep his memory alive for our 8-year-old son, Leo. That was a mistake. The Harmon family was Atlanta royalty. They owned Harmon's Heritage, an upscale soul food restaurant chain that had been a city staple for decades. My mother-in-law, Vivian Harmon, had built her entire identity around being the powerful matriarch of that business and a pillar of her megachurch. To the outside world, she was devout, generous, and loving. Behind closed doors, she was a master manipulator who ruled through financial control and emotional intimidation. From the day Daniel brought me home, Vivian made it clear I was an outsider. I wore silk suits instead of extravagant church hats. I prioritized my career over joining the family business. She resented that her golden child had chosen a woman who refused to bow to her. When Daniel died, whatever fragile thread tied me to her grace snapped completely. The dinner started tense. I sat quietly near the middle of the long table, cutting my food, listening to forced chatter, keeping my mouth shut even as Vivian held court bragging about record profits I knew were a fiction. The restaurants were bleeding. But I said nothing. Then the silverware clinked. Vivian stood up slowly, smoothed her burgundy dress, and looked directly at me with a chilling combination of triumph and disdain. "Family," she began, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of a seasoned preacher. "Thanksgiving is a time for gratitude. But it is also a time to protect the sanctity of our traditions." She paused. "Since my beloved son Daniel went to be with the Lord, Maya has grown cold. She avoids our dinners. She disrespects how this family operates. She casts a dark, toxic cloud over everything we've built." She raised her chin. "Therefore, I am calling for a formal family vote. I propose that Maya be officially and permanently excluded from all future Harmon family events." I didn't gasp. I didn't defend myself. I just watched to see who would be brave enough to speak up. No one was. Vivian's hand went up first. Then my sister-in-law Renee, with a satisfied smirk on her face, the same woman whose designer handbag I had personally paid off 6 months earlier to save her from a collection agency. Then the aunts, the uncles, the cousins. One by one. 12 hands. The same people who had hugged me at the door 2 hours ago. The room was dead silent except for the ticking of a grandfather clock. That's when Renee's husband, Kyle, a man who hadn't held a steady job in 3 years, leaned forward and spoke with the soft, patronizing tone of someone guiding a meditation class rather than publicly executing his sister-in-law. "Maya," he began, clasping his hands together like a therapist. "We're all on a healing journey. Your toxic independence is a trigger for us. It creates a hostile environment. We just need to protect our peace. Generational wealth building." The phrase nearly made me laugh out loud. Kyle had been living rent-free in a townhouse Vivian owned for years, pitching failed startup ideas while eating turkey I had quietly subsidized. Renee jumped in immediately, pointing an acrylic nail in my direction. "You think because you wear expensive suits you can look down your nose at us? You're a widow, Maya. You should be leaning on us. Without Daniel, you are just a guest who overstayed her welcome." I stared at her. Stone-faced. I knew for a fact her credit cards regularly declined at grocery stores. I knew because I was the one who had quietly written the check to stop her SUV from being repossessed. But she didn't know I knew. And that gap between what they assumed and what I actually knew was about to become the most expensive mistake of their lives. I was fully prepared to sit through it all in silence and walk out. But then a small, trembling hand grabbed my sleeve. Leo. His fork lay abandoned on his plate. His big brown eyes were wide and full of tears. His lip was quivering. He looked up at me and said, in a voice that shattered me completely, "Mom, why does Grandma hate us?" The cold, calculated armor I wear for my job melted instantly. And then Vivian made the last mistake of her life. Instead of compassion, she slammed her hand on the mahogany table, glasses rattling, silverware clanking, and pointed at my son. "Leo, stop that whining this instant. I will not tolerate a crying child ruining my Thanksgiving dinner." She narrowed her eyes. "You act just as spoiled and disrespectful as your mother. Daniel would be ashamed of how soft you're raising this boy." The room went absolutely frozen. She had just weaponized my dead husband's name against his 8-year-old child. Every ounce of restraint I had left evaporated. I stood up slowly. I took Leo's hand. And I looked at Vivian with an expression that made Kyle visibly shift backward in his chair and wiped the smirk clean off Renee's face. "You invoke my dead husband's name to justify bullying his child," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, which somehow made it more terrifying. "You want to talk about safe spaces? You banned me from the ribbon cutting of your new restaurant location because you were scared I'd wear a dress that outshone Renee." I turned to Kyle. "Keep the word toxic out of your mouth. The only toxic thing here is the entitlement of a man who hasn't paid a single bill with his own money in half a decade." I walked Leo to the foyer, helped him into his jacket, zipped it up against the November cold. At the front door, Renee found her fake courage. "Good riddance," she sneered. "Don't come crying to us when you realize how hard it is out there alone." I paused. Glanced back over my shoulder at the 12 people who had just voted to erase me. "Enjoy your turkey, Vivian," I said, perfectly calm. "I hope it tastes like victory. Because it's the last meal you'll ever enjoy in peace." I pulled the door shut behind me with a definitive, final thud. The cold Atlanta air hit my face like oxygen after a tomb. I buckled Leo into the car, watched his breathing slow as the city lights blurred past the windows, and while he drifted off in the back seat, my mind shifted from grieving widow to corporate crisis manager. In the parking garage of our penthouse, I opened my encrypted messaging app and found my lead attorney, Valerie, a brilliant, cutthroat legal predator who does not lose cases. I typed 4 words. "Initiate the Phoenix Protocol." The next morning, my phone was already flooded with notifications before 7 a.m. The first link my assistant sent me was a live social media broadcast. Renee, performing for her 50,000 followers, sitting in a cozy sweater with no makeup, a carefully curated vulnerability costume, dabbing her eyes with a crumpled tissue. My sister-in-law completely shattered our hearts. She stood up at our dinner table, screamed at my mother, and left. She's a greedy, cold woman who only cared about the Harmon name when Daniel was alive to pay for her lifestyle. The comments section was exactly what she wanted. Strangers calling me a gold digger, a wicked widow, a monster. She was soaking it up, replying with prayer hands and broken heart emojis. Valerie called before the video finished playing. "Are you watching this train wreck?" "I'm watching," I replied. She almost sold me with the no makeup look. "It gets worse," Valerie said. "Vivian filed with the state registry this morning. She had your name removed from the Daniel Harmon Memorial Scholarship Fund." That hit like a physical blow. The scholarship was something Daniel and I had built together, designed to help underprivileged youth attend college. I had personally funded the initial $200,000 endowment. And Vivian had just erased me from it and appointed Kyle as the new co-director. A man who cannot balance his own checking account was now managing a charity endowment. Valerie waited for my order. Do I issue a cease and desist? Gag order by noon? Emergency injunction by end of day? No, I said. We do absolutely nothing. Silence on her end. Maya, Renee's video has 20,000 views and climbing. The church community is eating this up. If you don't control the narrative, let them eat, I said. When an opponent is digging their own grave, the worst thing you can do is take the shovel away. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the morning traffic threading through Atlanta. Renee's video is documented defamation. Vivian's filing is documented financial manipulation. They are building my lawsuit for me, brick by brick. Silence terrifies narcissists. They'll get sloppy. They'll get bolder. They'll overplay their hand. And the Phoenix Protocol? Valerie asked. Accelerate it. I want every ledger, every lease, every vendor contract for Harmon's Heritage scoured by end of week. I want to know exactly how much they owe, who they owe it to, and where every penny went. They thought this was a social media war. They had no idea I was about to repossess their entire reality. The silence from my end drove Vivian to snap by Thursday afternoon. My phone lit up, Vivian Harmon. I let it ring 3 times, then answered without saying hello. Maya, she said, clipped and dripping with artificial authority. I'm calling in my official capacity as CEO of Harmon's Heritage. The board has been reviewing corporate assets. You are still in possession of the 2023 Range Rover registered under the restaurant group for tax purposes. You are no longer entitled to use it. Return it to the estate tonight. Leave the keys in the mailbox. The audacity was breathtaking. 2 years ago, when the restaurants were facing a brutal tax audit, Daniel had begged me to register my new car under the company name to help offset their liabilities with a depreciation deduction. I had agreed. The entire down payment, the monthly installments, and $25,000 in custom upgrades had all come from my personal account. She knew this. She was using a tax loophole to legally steal a vehicle I had paid for. She expected a fight. She expected tears. She was bracing for a screaming match. You're absolutely right, I said brightly. The vehicle belongs to the company. I'll have it returned tonight. Dead silence. Well, she stammered. Yes. See that it's washed. She hung up thinking she'd scored a victory. I called Darius, a man who owned a high-end custom auto shop in South Atlanta and owed me a considerable favor after I'd saved his business from a zoning dispute. At midnight, Darius and 2 mechanics arrived at my garage with a flatbed tow truck, heavy-duty power tools, and 4 concrete cinder blocks. I handed them the keys to the Range Rover. Then I watched them work with surgical precision. Off came the 4 custom forged alloy wheels and high-performance tires, $25,000 worth that I had personally purchased. Out came the imported floor mats. Out came the upgraded sound system interface. Everything I had financed, removed down to the last screw. What remained was the bare, factory-standard, undrivable skeleton of a vehicle that technically belonged to Harmon's Heritage. We loaded it onto the flatbed and drove through the sleeping streets of Atlanta to the Buckhead estate. I still had the gate code. The iron gates swung open. Darius backed the truck up the long, manicured driveway, the reversing alarm echoing in the quiet night, and we set the stripped Range Rover down on 4 concrete cinder blocks directly in front of Vivian's grand front doors, right beside her beloved rose bushes. I tucked a note beneath the windshield wiper. Written in beautiful calligraphy on thick cream cardstock, company car returned. Tires were paid for by me. By 7 a.m., my phone was ringing off the hook. Kyle. Renee. Vivian. Back to back to back. I didn't answer a single one. I just sat at my kitchen island, sipping espresso, imagining the exact moment Vivian stepped out in her silk robe to get the morning paper and found a $100,000 luxury SUV sitting on concrete blocks in her driveway for every wealthy, judgmental neighbor to see. They wanted to play corporate games with a seasoned professional. She had followed the letter of her own demand. I had simply kept what was mine. This was just the appetizer. At 10 a.m., I walked into the glass-walled conference room of the most ruthless corporate law firm in Atlanta. Valerie was already at the head of the table, sliding a leather-bound portfolio toward me. Forget the car, she said, a razor-sharp smile on her face. We have much bigger fish today. Are you ready to look at the real numbers? Inside the portfolio, commercial lease agreements for all 3 Harmon's Heritage locations. Vivian had spent years bragging about her brilliant deal with a massive real estate conglomerate. What she never knew, what nobody knew, was who actually owned the ground those restaurants stood on. 3 years ago, before Daniel died, the family business was quietly drowning. Vivian had mismanaged funds, overspent on church donations for social clout, and ignored commercial real estate trends. Their previous landlord was preparing to evict them from all 3 locations. Daniel came to me devastated. He knew his mother's pride would never allow her to accept a bailout from the daughter-in-law she despised. So I did what any crisis manager would do. I created a blind corporate entity. I named it Apex Properties. I bought all 3 commercial lots in cash and became their new landlord. Vivian spent years bragging about the brilliant deal she'd negotiated with a faceless conglomerate. She never knew that conglomerate was me, sitting at my laptop in our penthouse, quietly keeping her empire from going under. They signed the lease renewal yesterday, Valerie said, visibly satisfied. Kyle signed it, acting in his self-appointed capacity as CFO. Without a single lawyer reviewing the terms. She pulled up a secondary report on the monitor. He signed a 10-year extension with a 30% immediate rent hike. And, most importantly, he signed the accelerated default clause. Under the original agreement, Harmon's Heritage was required to complete $500,000 in infrastructure and safety upgrades by end of fiscal year. They hadn't pulled a single city permit. Under the clause Kyle had just authorized, Apex Properties could demand that entire $500,000 immediately. If they couldn't pay within 7 days, we had the legal authority to terminate all 3 leases, seize every physical asset inside the buildings, and lock the doors permanently. Kyle had handed me the keys to their entire kingdom because he wanted to look like a decisive executive without doing any of the actual work. Vivian had let it happen because she trusted a man using business buzzwords over the financial reality of her own failing empire. They had voted me out of the family, completely unaware that I literally owned the foundation they were standing on. They don't have $500,000 in liquid assets, I said. They can't even cover Renee's credit card minimums. And no bank will touch them, Valerie confirmed. Their credit is leveraged to the absolute limit. I looked out at the Atlanta skyline. Draft the demand letter. Send it by secure courier to the flagship restaurant. Let them see what happens when they disturb my peace. 2 days later, Kyle texted me a photo of his brand new business card, Kyle Bradley, Chief Financial Officer, Harmon's Heritage Restaurant Group. He followed it with a message asking me to sign and return a form relinquishing the 3% equity share Daniel had left me in the operating company. He called it a minor administrative detail. He thought my silence meant I was broken. He had no idea I already owned the entire chessboard. I didn't write a paragraph back. 6 words, congratulations on the new title. Check the safe. I watched the typing bubble appear. Disappear. Appear again. Then nothing. Because inside the back-office floor safe of the flagship Harmon's Heritage location was something Kyle very much did not want anyone to find. The forensic audit Valerie's team had been compiling told a very specific story. Someone had been systematically siphoning money from the operating accounts. $150,000, extracted through fake vendor invoices for kitchen repairs that never happened, inflated inventory costs, and direct cash schemes from that safe. The money had gone to offshore betting networks, high-stakes poker losses, weekend stays at boutique hotels in Midtown Atlanta, monthly lease payments on a high-rise condo with no connection to the Harmon family, and itemized receipts from luxury jewelers. Diamond tennis bracelets. Designer handbags. Red-soled heels. None of which had ever made it into Renee's closet. I planned to drop the audit on them at the exact right moment. Not before. That moment came on Sunday morning. Vivian had thrown a lavish celebratory brunch to honor Kyle's new title. The same dining room. The same crystal glasses. The same aunts and uncles who had watched my public execution in silence. Vivian circulating and accepting congratulations. Kyle playing the humble executive. Renee praising her husband's business acumen to anyone who would listen. Then the brass knocker sounded. A licensed process server in a gray suit asked specifically for Kyle Bradley, Chief Financial Officer of Harmon's Heritage Restaurant Group. I imagine the pride Kyle must have felt being summoned by his title. He probably adjusted his blazer before heading to the door. He signed the delivery manifest with a flourish. Opened the envelope. Pulled out the crisp, watermarked legal documents bearing the Apex Properties logo. The smile left his face like a physical injury. He couldn't speak. His hands shook so hard the paper rattled. Vivian snatched the documents from him, adjusted her reading glasses, and started reading. Accelerated default. $500,000 demanded within 7 calendar days. All 3 locations to be locked and all physical assets seized if payment was not received. Vivian dropped the papers like they were on fire. The room erupted. Mimosa glasses abandoned. Private chef frozen in the kitchen. Kyle frantically explaining that he hadn't read the fine print. Renee crying about her lifestyle evaporating. The wealthy church friends making hurried excuses and heading for the door. And then, 10 minutes after the demand letter arrived, Vivian's tablet chimed with a high-priority notification. An anonymous encrypted email. Subject line, Harmon's Heritage Restaurant Group, Forensic Audit. Executive Summary enclosed. 20 pages of hard data. No preamble. No signature. Just the full forensic breakdown of every dollar Kyle had stolen, where it came from, and exactly where it went. Including Chloe. I can only imagine what happened in that room. Renee reading the condo lease. The wire transfer for a tropical vacation. A name she didn't recognize. Connor, who is Chloe? And Kyle backing away, hands raised, stammering that it was all fabricated, that Maya had hacked the accounts, that this was a setup designed to tear them apart. Vivian didn't believe him. She knew how to read a bank statement. She saw the timestamps. The routing numbers. The dates matching exactly the days Kyle had volunteered to personally handle the restaurant deposits. The celebration turned into a war zone. The congregation fled. Within an hour, Vivian had lost her business, her dignity, and her audience simultaneously. That was the point. If I had only sent the least demand, they would have unified against a common enemy. Instead, I dropped the audit 10 minutes later and eliminated any chance of that. Divide and conquer. They were too busy tearing each other apart to even think about coming after me. The call I'd been waiting for came Tuesday morning. I was in my sunroom getting a manicure when the phone lit up. A photo of Vivian in an enormous feathered hat at her pulpit, looking down at her congregation with absolute moral superiority. I let it ring twice, then answered on speaker. Maya, sweetheart. The voice that came through was unrecognizable from the woman who had slammed her hand on a mahogany table and screamed at my child. Soft. Sickeningly warm. Practiced. I've been praying for you so hard. We've all been so worried about you and little Leo. Tensions ran a bit high over the holiday, but at the end of the day, family is family. She was trying to reframe a 12-person coordinated tribunal as a minor emotional misunderstanding over turkey. To what do I owe the pleasure, Vivian? She pivoted. The family business, she explained, had encountered a minor administrative hurdle. A deeply unprofessional commercial landlord named Apex Properties was using predatory, borderline illegal tactics to threaten their operating leases. A completely fabricated demand for $500,000. Pure extortion. She needed me to use my connections to find out who sat on Apex's board and make the problem disappear. Why would I do that, Vivian? I asked. Didn't you just appoint Kyle as your CFO? Surely a man of his mindful business acumen can handle a basic lease dispute. Heavy silence. Kyle is currently overwhelmed with operational restructuring. The lie was smooth, but I knew the truth. Kyle was the most hated man in her house, exposed as a thief and an adulterer, and utterly useless. This is where we need your expertise, Maya. I need you to call the board of Apex Properties and negotiate this down. Make it disappear. Family helps family. There it was. Even in her darkest hour, she viewed my skills as a resource she was entitled to command. Let me make sure I understand the sequence, I said. Last week you held a vote to permanently ban me from the family. Renee went on the internet and called me a greedy, wicked woman. You filed paperwork to erase my name from a scholarship fund I personally financed. And now you're calling to demand I save your business using the family loyalty card. Maya, you're focusing on the past. I am assessing the facts, I said. You chose Kyle to lead your financial future. You let him sign a 10-year lease with a 30% rent hike and an accelerated default clause without a single lawyer reading the fine print. You handed him the keys to the safe, and he rewarded your trust by stealing $150,000 to spend at casinos and on a mistress. Sharp intake of breath. How do you know about that? Because I know everything. I let that land. I know your credit is maxed out. I know your vendors are preparing to freeze your supply accounts. I know you don't have $500,000. Then you know we're going to lose everything, she cried, the matriarch act crumbling into raw desperation. Please, Maya. Call the board of Apex Properties. Ask them for an extension. You have the leverage. You have the vocabulary. Please, just ask them for a favor. I looked at my freshly painted nails. Deep burgundy. Flawless. I can't call the board of Apex Properties, I said quietly. Why not? She shrieked. Because I can't ask myself for a favor. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I have ever heard in my life. 3 years ago, I said, articulating every syllable with precision, your restaurants were 6 months behind on rent. Your previous landlord was drawing up eviction papers. Daniel came to me in tears, begging me to save the business his father started. He knew your pride would never allow you to accept help from the daughter-in-law you hated. So I created a blind corporate entity. I named it Apex Properties. I bought all 3 commercial lots in cash. I saved your business, Vivian. I am Apex Properties. I own the dirt beneath your flagship restaurant. I own the walls of your kitchens. I own the parking lot you just left that stripped Range Rover in. No, she gasped. No. That's a lie. You don't have that kind of money. I have exactly that kind of money. And I have your signature on a binding lease that's now in default. I paused. You voted me out of the family. You wanted to protect your safe space. Your safe space is sitting on my property. And your rent is due. She broke. Ugly, ragged sobs through the speaker. When you fail to pay, I said, I will terminate the lease. I will seize every stove, every table, and every piece of silverware inside those buildings. 5 days, Vivian. I pressed the red button and set the phone face down on the glass table. The consequences came fast and without mercy. I routed every call and voicemail from the Harmon family directly to Valerie's legal department inbox. They were no longer family. They were a defaulting corporate tenant. They showed up in person on Thursday morning, all 3 of them. Vivian, Renee, and Kyle storming through my office doors looking like they hadn't slept in days. Kyle went straight for my desk, slammed both hands on the surface, and went full confrontational. He accused me of entrapment, corporate fraud, extortion. Threatened to take me to the district attorney. Threatened to have my license pulled and my firm destroyed. I let him finish. I didn't blink once. When he finally ran out of air, I reached into the lower right drawer of my desk and slowly, deliberately slid a thick black folder across the polished surface until it stopped exactly 1 inch from his hands. I highly recommend you open that before you say another word. He stared at it. The arrogance in his eyes flickered and died. His hands shook as he flipped the cover open. 20 pages of forensic audit. His name on forged vendor invoices. His face on security footage. Bank routing numbers connecting restaurant accounts to offshore gambling networks and a midtown condo. All the color drained from his face. Renee snatched the folder from him. She found the wire transfers. She found the name. She looked down at her own bare wrists. Who is Chloe? Kyle backed away, hands raised, claiming it was fabricated, that I'd hacked the accounts, that this was all a setup. I didn't fabricate your signature on the apartment lease, Kyle, I said calmly. I didn't fabricate the bank security footage. The forensic accounting firm I hired is federally recognized. You stole $150,000 from your mother-in-law to fund a gambling addiction and a mistress. Renee's scream was visceral. She threw the folder at him. Pages exploded across my office floor. She lunged at him with her fists. Kyle scrambled backward and then looked at me with wild, desperate eyes. We can fix this quietly. I'll pay it back. Just keep this inside the family. It will ruin the restaurant's reputation. Pay it back with what? I said. You have no job. No assets. The restaurant chain you claim to manage is insolvent primarily because you drained its operating capital. You have nothing. I'll sign whatever you want, he begged, the tears coming now, tracking through his carefully trimmed beard. I'll sign the restaurants over to you. Full control. Just let me walk away. Have mercy. You're misunderstanding the timeline, I said, my voice dropping. The settlement window expired before you woke up today. I paused. Let that register across all three of their faces. At 8 a.m. this morning, certified, unredacted copies of that forensic audit were hand-delivered to two very specific locations. The first, the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. You didn't just steal from your mother-in-law. You committed wire fraud and failed to declare $150,000 in illicit income. The IRS does not care about safe spaces. They care about tax evasion, and they pursue it with extreme prejudice. Kyle's knees buckled. He grabbed the guest chair to stay upright. The second package was delivered to the white-collar crime unit of the Atlanta Police Department. They have the bank records. The forged invoices. The security footage. Your assets will be frozen by end of week. Your passport will be flagged. You're going to federal prison. Renee collapsed to the floor, knees hitting the carpet with a thud, face in her hands. Vivian released her grip on the doorframe and walked slowly into the center of my office. She looked at Kyle crumpled in the chair. She looked at Renee on the floor. Then she looked at me. And the matriarch of the Harmon family, the woman who had ruled her world through financial control and fear for decades, got down on her knees and crawled across my office carpet until her manicured hands gripped the edge of my oak desk. Maya. Her voice was barely a croak. I'm begging you on my knees before God. Do whatever you want with Kyle. Let him rot. But please, have mercy on the family name. Think of Leo. He's a Caldwell. You cannot take away his father's legacy. I'm begging you, mother to mother. The audacity. This same woman who had screamed at my crying 8-year-old at that dinner table. Who had called him soft. Who had used Daniel's name as a weapon against his own child. I stood up and walked around the desk until I was standing directly over her. Do not ever put my son's name in your mouth again. She flinched. You want to talk about Daniel's legacy? I said. You rotted it from the inside out. You turned the business he spent his life building into a piggy bank for your vanity. You neglected the infrastructure. You alienated the vendors. You let a con artist drain the operating accounts. You didn't protect his legacy, Vivian. You infected it. And if I leave those restaurants in your hands for one more day, there will be nothing left for Leo but debt, scandal, and a ruined name. I crouched down to her eye level. I am not destroying Daniel's legacy. I am rescuing it from you. I stood back up. I am seizing all 3 restaurant locations. I am changing the locks at midnight. Every tainted asset will be liquidated. Every honest vendor you neglected will be paid. And every piece of value that remains will be transferred into an irrevocable blind trust with one exclusive beneficiary. Vivian stared at me. Transferred where? Leo, I said. He inherits a clean, profitable empire the day he turns 25. Until then, you, Renee, and everyone else at that Thanksgiving table will have zero access. Not one title. Not one dime. Vivian reached for the hem of my pants. Maya, please. I mortgaged my house to keep up appearances. Where will I go? How will I live? I stepped back and pulled away. I suggest you learn how to budget. I turned toward the door and opened it wide. My security team was already waiting in the hallway. Your safe space is officially closed. Get out of my office. The fallout was public, swift, and completely without mercy. 2 days later, police lights illuminated the early morning fog outside the Midtown condo Kyle had leased for his mistress. He was marched out in handcuffs, wearing the same wrinkled shirt from my office. Multiple counts of wire fraud and tax evasion. No family money for bail. No high-priced attorney to spin the story. He was processed and left in a holding cell. Renee filed for divorce the next morning in a desperate attempt to separate herself from the wreckage. Without my hidden financial interventions propping up her lifestyle, reality arrived without mercy. The SUV was gone. The penthouse seized by creditors. The platinum cards cancelled. Weeks later, my assistant confirmed her new employment, closing shift at a diner on the outskirts of the city. Polyester uniform. Laminate tables. Chipped nails. 50,000 social media followers, completely silent. But the most precise justice was reserved for Vivian. The bank moved on the heavily mortgaged Buckhead estate. A bright yellow foreclosure sign was planted directly in front of her pristine rose bushes. She was forced into a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a decaying complex, thin walls, ancient appliances, Atlanta summer heat bleeding through drafty windows. But the poverty wasn't the real punishment. The real punishment was what happened when she walked into her megachurch the following Sunday, clinging to the hope that she could play victim one last time. The news had already swept through the congregation. When she walked down the center aisle, every person she had spent decades judging and manipulating simply turned their backs. The pastor looked away. The choir wouldn't meet her eyes. The pew she had ruled from for 20 years was empty. She was excommunicated from the only world that had ever mattered to her. While they fell, I rebuilt. Apex Properties legally seized all 3 restaurant locations. The old Harmon's heritage signs came down. I cleared the bad debts, paid the vendors they'd neglected, and restructured the entire corporate entity. Every appreciating asset, every intellectual property right, every functioning account, sealed inside an ironclad blind trust. One beneficiary. Leo. 6 months after that Thanksgiving dinner, I sat in a curved leather booth at one of Atlanta's most exclusive restaurants. Soft jazz through the speakers. Warm golden light over crisp white linen. I wore a tailored emerald silk dress and held a glass of Bordeaux. Across the table, Leo was in a small blazer, laughing at something the waiter had said, cutting into an enormous chocolate dessert. No fear in his eyes. No anxiety. No grandmother waiting to snap at him for existing. Just a little boy who was safe, loved, and whose future had been legally fortified against every person who had ever tried to take it from him. I reached across the table and wiped a smudge of chocolate from his chin. He grinned at me and took another enormous bite. I leaned back, completely at peace. They voted to ban me from the family. So I bought the family and I evicted them. Respect is not requested. It is collected.